one other thing I'll notice about the case in general to start is that where the case occurred. The case occurred in Texas, which is known for patent cases, but in the Western District of Texas, in Waco, Texas, in front of Judge Albright, not in the more well-known Eastern District of Texas.
The big item of interest is a jury verdict of more than $2 billion, which is one of the biggest patent verdicts in history. It's also interesting that the case was tried before a jury, and on one of the patents, the jury found literal infringement, and on the other, they found infringement under the doctrine of equivalence. Doctrine of equivalence has quite a lot of imprecision. It's hard to define what is an equivalent. And so as this case goes on appeal, I would expect that at least that part of this decision will be heavily scrutinized by the Federal Circuit, and it will go on appeal. The big point here, though, is that $2 billion of damages really emphasizes the value of intellectual property and the importance of this technology and the patent system itself. Damages are a question of fact. That means that the jury gets to determine what the damages are in the first instance. But the damages are calculated to give a compensation for the value of the technology. In this case, there are no willful damages. That's where there is intentional infringement after you know about a patent. In this case, by the way, they did know about the patent. There had been earlier litigation on it, but there still was no finding that they deliberately infringed. So that means this $2 billion amount was the amount necessary to compensate VLSI and NXP for the use of their technology. And learning to evaluate that technology is a great skill, and one which we've observed before needs to be a primary point of emphasis in every international corporation.
If you happen to be selling a device, compare it to washing machines or compare it to a refrigerator, there's just not that many bought and sold in a given year. But if you happen to be inventing in an area that is selling devices that are sold at this magnitude and then resold the next year and the next year and the next year, then you could see a larger damage award that might happen in a smaller industry.
In a patent trial, the damages proof and the presentation of evidence about the use of the technology and the value of technology is a very important part of the trial. Very often, economists are used to help assess the value of this technology in the marketplace. I mention that because that will perhaps help Chinese courts to recognize that they need to rely on economic evidence and experts perhaps to properly set the compensatory value of technology. My guess is they chose Intel because that was their biggest competitor, and the damages they recognized would be billions of dollars if they won, which they did. But if they have succeeded against Intel, they may go on to sue some of the other semiconductor producers in the area. And those semiconductor producers may be wise to enter into licensing negotiations to avoid the expense of a trial.
Or a declaratory judgment action to try to preempt where the case is being brought.
One thing we haven't mentioned that's important is that the United States also has a procedure to stop imports of infringing goods at the International Trade Commission. So that can be an additional way to get leverage with your competitors to ensure that they take a proper license to the technology they're using.
I like to use something I've learned from my mentor. He said that companies have to decide, do they just want to make things, or do they want to be innovative and make things? And often when all they do is make things, they will be on the defendant side of the patent infringement V. But if they innovate, they will become the intellectual property owner, and they will then be at a more equal footing with their competitors, and sometimes even the plaintiff in a patent infringement case.
Your comment kind of prompts me to make one other bit of advice for Chinese companies, and that is perhaps the best thing you can do to prepare for patent infringement suits is to have your own strong patent portfolio.
Exactly.
If you have your own inventions, which are being used by others, that can be the best defense of all against patent infringement.
And that can enter into cross licenses, better negotiations, more
and then you don't
terms.
have the expense of a $10 million patent infringement suit. Instead, you can negotiate a license. Yes.
And I give China a lot of credit. You've only had a patent system for less than 50 years. And China's moving pretty quickly. You know, obviously, they're not quite at the same level, but in 10 years, I expect they'll be much closer if they continue to innovate, continue to protect their IP, continue to get patents on good patents, not simply paper patents, but good patents.